Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Secret Origins of Mint Condition. I am James, and with me is Joe.
Howdy, folks.
And Chris.
Hi there.
And returning to the podcast, a friend of the show and classic X-Men expert, Arco Esposito.
Thank you very much for that, James. I happy to be back, and I feel like you're going to put the expertise to the test today. So let's hope I get through it.
Yes, and he is joining us again because we are doing a character spotlight on everyone's favorite mutant team, the X-Men. We've spoken about them on and off, but Arco has, I actually got into the X-Men because of Arco's love of the X-Men when I was at Mint Condition, and even afterwards when we were working together at the gym. He would still give me his trade paperbacks, and that's how I learned a lot of my X-Men knowledge. So thank you, Arco, for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
So let's get into it. We talked a little bit about this on your origin episode, but what is it about the X-Men that it's made it your favorite team? And I think if I may be mistaken, your favorite books to read and collect.
Yes, that definitely my favorite books, favorite stories, and favorite characters. And I think the biggest thing that anybody can really take away from the X-Men as opposed to other superhero groups is how different they are, not only from other groups, but within themselves also. You have characters like Cyclops and Jean Grey who are mutants, means they were born with their powers, but they look human. They can pass as humans. And then you have a person who looks like Nightcrawler and who can't walk down the block because he literally looks like a demon and has a tail and pointy ears and only 3 fingers. You have a person who's only 5'2" who looks like Wolverine. And the differences of these characters really stood out to me from the first time that I saw them. And they hooked me right away, but with their look, and then secondly, and more importantly, for longevity, the way that they were written, their stories. That's what got me.
So, what would be? I guess you mentioned in your first episode we did with you that you were exposed to these via Secret Wars and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Mm-hmm.
What was the X-Men story that stands out to you as the one that really got you into these characters?
That's a fantastic question. I would say that if you remember, I said that I saw them for the very first time during the Marvel Superhero Secret Wars 12-issue limited series. My first comic book was Secret Wars number 11, and the X-Men were part of that series. But I had no idea who they were, not one clue. So when I went back and I got more issues of that series from 1 to 12, it sort of kind of fleshed them out a little bit, but not enough to really tell you who they were. All it did was make me more interested in finding out who these characters were. So at that time, it was the run was, if I'm not mistaken, the 180s. It was the time that the Secret Wars came out. So the X-Men 180s, late 170s and 180s was when it came out, and that's when I got into them. And although I'm not exactly sure what storyline it wasn't a huge storyline, but I do remember that the Morlocks were a prominent part of it, and now you have a whole other bunch of mutants that people that you can't even imagine that they're in comic books. These people aren't pretty. They're not Clark Kent with the cowlick looks and the Midwestern looks. It's a whole other ball game, and it really roped me in.
No, that sounds great. I guess for the audience or anyone listening who's only peripherally knowledgeable of the X-Men, or maybe only through the movies and stuff, are you up to the task of telling us, like, up to, I guess, whenever you stop reading, the chronology of the different teams? Like, so we had the original team, which was the 5 X-Men. So it was with Jean, Cyclops, Iceman, Angel, and Beast, right? And Xavier.
Right.
So what's the next phase after we get those original 5?
Oh, okay. Okay, so we're going. So this is classic stuff. Okay, cool. So that original 5, included a few dozen issues later, a person by the name of the Mimic. They allowed him into
Mhm.
the group. He was a superhero that was basically able to mimic the powers of everybody else. So he was in it, and you didn't really have too much of a change in the core group until Neil Adams came in the late '60s and created Polaris and Havoc. Havoc being the long lost brother of Cyclops. So that group was it up until 1970. So you have the five, and then you had Havoc and Polaris that were kind of in and out of the group, and up until 1970, that was it. And then from 1970 to 1975, you didn't have any X-Men. You just had reprints until the seminal, groundbreaking, giant size X-Men #1 by I believe Joe's favorite writer, if
Yeah,
I'm not
Len
mistaken,
Wein. Good for
Len
you,
Wein.
Arco.
Yes,
Yes.
I know. I remember you telling me how
Yeah.
you met him,
Yeah.
and
Suck
my
up.
and my leave and
Uh,
and my
those are good.
second least favorite cartoonist artist when it came to the X-Men, Dave Cockrum. He was just too simple for what the X-Men were. But you know that introduced us to Nightcrawler, to Thunderbird, to Storm, to Colossus, and for most people, it introduced us to Wolverine, except for those lucky few that a year or so earlier were able to get Hulk 180, 181, where he
I'm one of
showed
those
up.
lucky few.
Yes. So yeah, so
Yeah.
that's and that was the core group, James, that everybody knows at that point. In 1975, when they took over, you know, you had the original X-Men were still around. Angel, Cyclops, Jean Grey, Iceman, and then you had this new group. And what were they going to do? Were they going to put them all together? No, turned out they weren't. And the original group left, and now you had this classic group, and you had them from issue 95 until issue 139, and that's when more changes came.
Mm.
Was did the original group retire? Was that when they went and became X Factor, or is that later?
No, no, the original group went their own ways, and in the '70s, you had them. You had let's see, you had Angel and Iceman. They joined the Champions.
Yes.
It was a little bit of a West Coast group, also with Doctor Strange, I think, and the Hulk was in it. If I'm not mistaken, the Silver Surfer was in it also. Then in the '80s, you had Angel and Iceman was part of the Defenders, the New Defenders.
Oh, I forgot that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then Beast, however, in 1972, which I actually was reading the reprint issue right before I got on with
Oh.
you guys. In Amazing Tales #11, Beast went from being a normal looking, quote unquote, mutant man to the furry blue beast that we all know and love him by some kind of concoction that he put for himself. And he's
Mm.
been like that ever since, pretty much 90% of the time. But he joined the Avengers. So he was a card carrying Avenger for the longest time. And
Right.
what you were talking about, James, 1985, classic storyline where Jean Grey, you know, if we're
Mm.
skipping a lot here, but Jean Grey by 1985 had been dead for about 4 or 5 years because she died in issue 137 of the Dark Phoenix saga X-Men. And a few years later, they decided that they were going to bring her back, and they brought her back in a Fantastic Four comic, like 265 or something. Excuse
Oh.
me if I don't have it. And they found her at the bottom of Jamaica Bay, and and that
Don't live
was
with the mob.
yeah, and that was that same time that the X-Men, I think, were at like X-Men 195, 196, and Scott. Scott, who was married to Madeline Pryor in the X-Men comic books, who unbeknownst to us, was a Jean Grey clone. I'm sorry if I'm blowing anybody's mind here, but a Jean Grey clone. That's why he was so madly in love with Madeline Pryor. Couldn't understand why he was, so drawn to her, but that was the reason why. Left her, left his newborn baby son, Nathaniel Summers, also known as Cable.
Okay.
Grew up to be Cable, and then went to left Madeline and right then and there in Alaska where they were living, and then went to pick up Jean. And the original group got back together again, and they formed X Factor. And not just a regular group of mutants. They were basically they were doing the thing where during the day they would be out hunting quote unquote mutants, but as X Factor, they were actually taking group mutants in off the streets so they would not hurt themselves or other people.
Wow, that was a great
Wow,
recap.
that's fantastic, Arco. Man,
trust me, it was a very. I glossed over most of it, obviously, but I didn't want to bore you too much.
Still fantastic.
No, that was great. So I guess we have a lot of ground we can cover, and obviously you skipped a lot of ground, and there's a lot of things to unpack. But let's start with the characters. I guess who are your top 5 favorite X-Men or mutants in the X-Men universe?
Okay, well, I'm going to go with, obviously, my favorite is going to be Wolverine. And Wolverine was my favorite as a kid because of the way he looked and the fact that these claws came out of him and you couldn't kill him, and the healing factor. And then it was very superficial why Wolverine was everybody's favorite when I was younger. However, the writers, whether it be Claremont or Jim Lee or some of the people from the 90s, they put so many layers on Wolverine that made him such a great character. Just how old he is, what he's been through, all that he knows. It's just more than just the claws for me. My second one is Cyclops. I love the Boy Scout. I do. He's just, he tried to be the son that Xavier never wanted. Okay. And, can never really live up to his own expectations. I love Jean Grey. But I love her as Marvel Girl and not as Phoenix. I don't like anybody who's that overpowered. I love the Dark Phoenix saga. However, I liked her much better as just a regular mutant in the group. I think she works better. My fourth would be Colossus, because he was such a farm boy. He didn't want to leave. He didn't want to leave his family when Xavier came to his farm in Russia back in 1975. Didn't want to leave his young sister. So one of the storylines that I love of his that was so poignant was when he died in the early 2000s so that all mutants could live, and his death prevented others from having the legacy virus, which was a thing back in the 90s, if you remember.
Yep, yes.
But of course, you needed Joss Whedon to bring him back about 10 years later. So kind of ruined that a little bit, but that's fine. And then finally, I think everybody's favorite rogue of the 90s, not rogue, excuse me, I should have said a different word, bad boy, was Gambit.
Really tipped your hand there, didn't you?
Yeah, sorry. Sorry. Well, I mean, he was into Rogue too, but Gambit was such a great character. A lot of people don't realize that when he came, he started out in X-Men 266 as a nothing character, an absolutely nothing character. He was created by Jim Lee at the time, and what they made him within 2 years was phenomenal. It really was. I love his look. I love his power set. I love the way he talked, that stupid Cajun accent. I don't care who it was that wrote him. I read that accent and I read it just like Gambit would say it. So those are my favorite.
No, that's a great lineup.
Cool.
Thank you.
Chris and Joe, I know you didn't even prepare for it, and I know you're not as steeped in it as Arco, but I guess, Chris, do you have your favorite X-Men?
Sure. Mine is a little bit of a mixed bag. for different reasons. And I don't know that I have I don't know that I have a top 5 in terms of like order, but I was always a fan of Iceman, mostly because of his powers. Honestly, I just thought I always liked the idea of ice powers, so I appreciated that. I loved Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler was always
Yeah.
one of my favorites. The way he looked, I loved his power, his ability. That teleportation was super cool. But one of the things I also always loved about Nightcrawler, at least the Nightcrawler that I read, was like how gentle he was, how thoughtful he was. Right? It was
And very
genuinely
very
upsetting.
religious too, Chris. Very
Yeah,
religious. Yep.
yeah,
Mhm.
very very religious, and how much conflict that's set up within him. That here he is religious, he's a Christian and he looks like a devil, right? So like trying to reconcile that with himself, all of the work he put into his relationship with Kitty Pryde, right? Because he was so unsettling for Kitty for so
Hmm.
long.
Yep.
And he tried really hard to give her the benefit of the doubt as to why and the understanding and everything. But being, you mentioned it, you hit on it earlier, Arco, the fact that he could also, because of his looks, he could be rejected not only by like humanity in general, but be rejected by his own kind.
Right.
Genuinely upsetting. So watching him navigate that, reading him navigate that, he was always one that I liked too. I was also a fan of Cyclops. I liked that he was pretty unflappable, and also that his power compared to so many of the other X-Men was like felt very underwhelming, right? Like he could be such a one-dimensional character,
Hmm.
because he shoots eye beams. Okay, well that's cool, but how many other X Men can do so much more than that?
Right.
His powers always felt very one-dimensional. So how you take a character with a one-dimensional power and make it a three-dimensional character, I always thought was impressive. I always liked Storm. The way she carried herself, her powers, I thought were super cool. But the respect that everybody on the team accorded her, I always thought was really really great. So and she and oh gosh, and now I'm gonna forget the who played Storm in the movie.
Halle Berry.
Thank you, Halle
Yep.
Berry. She really made it for me. I thought she really, really embodied Aurora, and I really liked what she brought to the character. So much like, and we had talked about this in other episodes, James. That like we weren't big fans of Captain America, but Chris Evans really did it for us. And now when we go back and we read Cap, or when we think of Cap, we think of Chris Evans, and that is in a lot of ways how I feel about Storm. Um, so I think I've only named 4, but honestly, I can't think of a fifth that really stuck with me. I was never a huge Wolverine fan. Gambit was fun, but I didn't love him.
Mm.
So I think there were a lot of other X-Men that I liked, but didn't love the way that I love the 4 that I mentioned.
No, that's a great list, especially as in
Yeah.
kind of impromptu. I just said so, and you had good reasoning, so I'll take it. Joe, do you have a few X-Men that are at your top?
Oh yeah, I mean Chris poached a few already, but the
Excellent.
original team is
That's
always
really all I could ask for.
yeah, the original team, of course. But one that Chris didn't mention, or Arco, but to that matter, is Rogue. I always thought Rogue was kind of cool that she couldn't touch anybody, and I just think that made her even a more sympathetic character.
Mhm.
She
Yeah,
steal
And that's a good
powers
word
away.
to use, not only for her but for all of them, because
Yes.
most of the X-Men had powers where they not only they not only manifest with the way they look like Nightcrawler, but also in the way that they couldn't control them easily. So
Cyclops without his
Cyclops,
visor,
when he
right?
was a kid, couldn't
Yeah,
couldn't
without
Yeah,
the
look at
visor.
yeah,
anybody without killing them. Rogue throughout, and I don't know if it's changed in the last 15 years, but couldn't touch anybody, or else she
right.
had to draw their powers, their memories, and the one
Hmm.
time that it was permanent, when she was absorbed Carol Danvers' memories and personality and powers. So that was definitely sympathetic. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I also liked the Beast when he did turn blue, and I liked when he joined the Avengers and they had that great friendship, that bromance with Wonder Man. I thought that was very well
Yes,
written.
yes.
I
Although
love
that
that.
happened more in the 80s, but yes, I do
Yeah,
remember that.
yeah, and of course I like and Nightcrawler was always one of my favorites for the same reason that Chris expounded upon, that whole Catholic guilt and then looking like the devil, and having to reconcile
Mhm.
that.
Really,
And
that's interesting. I'm so surprised, given your penchant for
right.
pushing Daredevil stories. I'm really surprised that's something that that lined up with
Oh,
your interests.
well, there you go. Secret.
Oh no,
I'm
no,
just stating the
absolutely. It's one of
obvious.
the reasons I think you had suggested a
Yeah.
little while back. Was it not Daredevil Born Again? Which one did you? Was that the one you suggested, or was that
Yeah, that
James's suggestion?
You mean the best comic book story ever written? Daredevil Born
That's
Again?
it.
Yes.
So that's the one you had
that's up
suggested.
there. I
Yeah,
agree.
and the parallels between Daredevil and Nightcrawler, though, of course, Matt Murdock could always hide the devil that he was, whereas Nightcrawler couldn't hide the devil
Could
he
not.
looked like. So,
Could not.
so
No.
no, yeah, I'm right there with you.
And I'll throw in Wolverine. I think everybody just kind of fell in love with Wolverine at the very beginning because he was so intense. And Arco, maybe you can clear this up for me, but we knew he had this animalistic
Mhm.
side, but in the early issues under Claremont, I don't think we ever saw him kill anybody or gut anybody like he was later known to do.
No.
But I think the first time that happened might have been when they came up against the Hellfire Club and he killed some of those goons.
Yes.
Is that possible?
Yes.
Am I remembering that right?
The
Okay.
Yeah,
Hellfire
he
issues in the 120s. That's when he did go through
Yeah.
the goons, and he
yeah
was a little bit
Yes.
more
There was a holy
bloodthirsty.
shit
Yep.
moment,
he had to
right?
be.
Yeah.
They kept trying to pull him back at that point. They kept trying to stop
They,
him from killing.
Mm-hmm.
but they couldn't do it. At some point, they had to let him
Right.
go, and that's became even more popular. I
I
think.
agree.
So,
I agree.
so those
Well,
are my
Wolverine
favorite
was also
X-Men.
just really sharp for as much as he wasn't one of my favorites or anything. He was just really sharp character design because it was. So let me ask you before I share any of my own
Mm-hmm.
thoughts on this. So I want to put this question out to the group and especially to Arco as our resident X-Men expert. But what do you think was so strong about Wolverine / Logan, his character design that really made him resonate? I mean, is it at this point, is it true that he's the only X-Men that we've seen in every X-Men movie too?
Hmm.
He
No,
wasn't in the last one.
He wasn't in the last one.
He wasn't
Yeah.
in the last one, and he showed up just
Okay.
for a split second for a cup of coffee
In
with
first class.
Oh, when
at
he
the
told him
bar.
to F off.
Yes,
Yeah.
at the
Yeah. When he
bar.
told. Yes. Yes.
As far as his design, I think that Len Wein was a. I'm sorry. Was Len Wein the artist for that? I'm sorry, or is he the writer? I apologize.
He was the
He was
writer.
the
He was the
writer.
writer.
So Dave Cockrum changed the look from the Hulk issues a year or so earlier, just a little bit. He took the whiskers off.
Hmm.
He made the ear point a little bit higher,
Hmm.
and the claws were the same. Now the claws at that point, the way that it was written by Len Wein, that his he really didn't even know what his power was. Okay, so there
Right.
was no really a defined power that he had. He was just a little bit animalistic, a little bit of a brawler, and Claremont really did not do anything with that either. Well, and Claremont did not do anything with that either until issue 99, where Cockrum showed that the claws were not just on top of his hand, but were actually part of him, and that's when you see Banshee turn to him and says something in the Irish brogue, "Boy, oh, your claws, they're part of you. We didn't know that." And he goes, "You never asked."
That's
So, but
that's
not only that, but
lifted
his
straight from
look.
I Love Lucy.
Yeah, but not only his look, but also the way he spoke. He was the antithesis of the Boy Scout that was Cyclops. And what really worked, I think, looking back, because I didn't collect the issues at the time. Obviously, I've reread them. I've in books how they put Wolverine and Cyclops at each other's throats from the beginning, and originally over Jean Grey, and the fact that Wolverine was in love with her from the minute he saw her. And so it was always going to be a friction between the two.
And they've carried that ever since, I think.
Ever since. Yeah,
Yep,
pretty
for
much
most
ever
of
since. Respectfully, he's stood away from her, but he will always, always love her no matter what. I mean, he's been married to other people, he dated other people, but he always loved Jean Grey.
Yeah, and I was looking at, I could be wrong, but they said the original Wolverine costume design was done by John Romita Sr.
That's correct. Yes, that's
Yeah,
correct.
John Romita Sr. did the original costume design for him. So,
Right.
and in terms of just, I guess I think all the X Men that you guys have listed would have made my list. I loved Beast was my number one X Men. Wolverine being number two. Cyclops, Storm, Christopher Mary, the same reasons. But I think the only one that's not been brought up is I really enjoyed Archangel when Angel got transformed into the Angel of Death by Apocalypse and then
Mm-hmm.
had to work his way back. I really enjoyed that version of the character.
It's a good choice.
Very good
Uh,
choice.
I think since then he's been rehabilitated fully back to Angel, but I really enjoyed that. It was a pretty long time period that he was Archangel.
It was over 20 years.
Yes,
I remember when he lost the wings, and I remember when he got back the feathered wings. To be quite honest with you, I like the metal ones better.
yes, the metal ones. He was only like that was giving him a weapon. Like otherwise, he was just a guy who could fly with wings, which is really cool to look at. It's like he presented a
Yeah.
very powerful image, but Archangel, the wings actually were a weapon he could use. So
Yes.
Um, well, having gone through the list of characters in all our X Men, I think and since you gave us a brief summary of all of X Men, it's probably good for I guess some. I don't think Chris has read a lot of it. Joe has read it. I've read a lot of it, but out of order. What would you consider Arco or like? I guess your top 5 X Men recommendations. Not necessarily for new people, but just people who enjoy X Men or want to get a real flavor for. What would be your top 5 storylines that are out there?
Well, I would say, and I have a listed in front of me. However, speaking about some of the classic stuff from 1975, I know that there is a small little trade paperback that has issues, a giant size X Men through 95 to 99. If you can get those, I would say start there. You don't need to go back any further, unless you really want to, because the X-Men that you see today will all be in that issue, and that's a great starting point. But from where I started, and in '85, and going forward, I would say that my favorite storylines are also great places for people to start. James, I remember you speaking about this a few episodes ago. I brought it up at some point. Marvel Mutant Massacre happened in fall of 1986, and that's when the mutants started dying. Literally, they were getting killed in the all over the country, but mainly in the Morlock tunnels. That was a great storyline. It had some Thor in it. It had Power Pack in it for those who remember Power Pack from the '80s. Not a great, not a great group, but it's all right. They were in it, so that was fantastic. Um, and that was the beginning of the X-Men universe crossovers. I think you've also mentioned, James, that you read or you started reading Fall of the Mutants a few episodes back. That whole storyline was fantastic also, and there was actually a death of a X-Men character in that. James, did you read that? I don't want to give it away if you
No,
haven't.
yeah. You actually, I think you let me borrow your trade
Oh, okay.
way
Well,
back when. Yeah.
yeah, okay. So you know that a major character in New Mutants, but probably minor in the whole in the whole universe of X-Men died. Doug Ramsey, also known as Cypher. So that had some implications. That whole storyline, especially with the X-Men and what happened to them in Dallas. How everybody saw them on television dying, so the whole world thought they were dead. And then that led into 1988's Inferno, which was it was, I tell you, if anybody was, I've never done drugs before, but this is about as close as you're going to get. If you ever do drugs and you read this, I promise you, you'll trip out reading Inferno. It was insane. It was basically hell on earth, specifically in New York. And trust me, in 1988 New York, you weren't far from hell on earth. Joe, I'm sure you can speak to that. It was it was a great series. Also had lasting implications. Had Madeline Pryor in it, as the Goblin Queen. Um, a lot of characters, went crazy in that. But it really stuck home for me. Of a few years later, Executioner Song. If you remember that, folks, the early 90s, this is when the X-Men were two groups, your blue team, the gold team, but they were working with a lot of other X groups like X Factor, X Force. They were all in this. This was when Strife and Cable were, were at each other, and basically everybody else was in the crossfire. One of the greatest things from that particular series was the issue after it ended. One of the things that would happen to Xavier is that he was able to walk after that. He didn't need his wheelchair any longer, and it was just a temporary thing. So he was walking around talking to Jubilee, and he knew that it was going to be going away at some point, and it was really poignant to watch him basically lose his ability to walk, that he hadn't done it in so long, and he's just enjoying it as long as he possibly could, and then it just goes away at the end.
Sounds very like Flowers for Algernon.
Yeah, there you go. Very good. Thank you very much for bringing that up. I've been thinking about that, and I forgot the name of it.
Yeah, no, I was gonna mention it in our sci-fi episode, but we did but it never came up. But yeah, I hadn't known about that storyline, but that's exactly what it sounds like. It's a man who now has a thing that he knows he's going to lose, and what do you do when you have that limited amount of time to go? Yeah, this is a thing that I'm not going to get again.
Yeah, it was just one episode. I mean, one issue, and a little part of it, and so I remember that being very poignant. And then Fatal Attractions, and if you read Fatal Attractions, if you know anything from Wolverine in the 90s, you know that he lost the one thing that everybody knew him for, and that was his adamantium claws. He lost them, and it was ripped out of him in a great scene by Magneto, literally pulled the molten metal from his pores, every hole. it came out of everywhere, and he was still alive because of his healing factor. And what do we find out in that classic big splash page when he goes to be in the danger room again? That he goes to pop his claws, and they came out, and he's screaming because he realizes, because he's in pain, one, and two, that's when you realize that the claws were always bone, which means that he was born with them, and there was another layer. So I would say that those, you get started with any of those, you're good as an X-Men fan.
No, those are all great. I guess I should top it off with my favorite storyline of all time, and I think it was like the last storyline you read was Age of Apocalypse.
Yes, I was waiting for you to bring it up, James. Age of Apocalypse, and James, I think,
look at that. Arco's trying hard not to poach James.
I didn't want. I knew he was going to bring it up
so far. Truthfully,
Age of Apocalypse, and for me and James, maybe James as much as me, but it was such a departure from what we had seen. It was just somebody turned on a switch to another world where your characters, your beloved characters, and you had some other Marvel characters in this, but most of them were dead, and all that was basically around anymore were the X-Men characters. And what would they be like if they grew up a different way for 20 years? And this showed us, and it was so well done. The fact that at the end, when it was over, no, spoiler alert, but when it was over, it wasn't a happy ending, and it just ended. It was perfect the way it ended. It ended in white. Of course, it didn't just end. Some bits and pieces of it still stayed in the regular Marvel universe, which worked for me. Through the 90s, that worked. I thought it was cool, but that you're gonna have to. Those were a lot of issues. I have no problem collecting those issues, and I know that they make trade paperbacks for every single one of those issues. If you can find them, totally worth every penny you get if you spend on those, if you can get them.
Yeah, they're pricier, but I've had a couple of them. I have them like more digital now, just as easier for me to read. But but it's not just like the core issues. They gave you everything. Like all those compendiums give you because every X book was converted to Age of Apocalypse book, and then they also came out with a general Marvel universe, either a couple issues of what happened to all your other heroes that were alive. So
great.
It is worth the money if you want the investment of reading that entire. I think it's like 5 volumes, or you can spend the big bucks and buy the omnibus, which is like $150. That's like a tome. But
or do what I did, buy 3 different. I have 3 full series of it, so Yeah, so do what I did. Yeah.
I want to, if I can, for a second, I sort of want to flip one of the questions on its head, because it's just not a thing I've considered, but in other episodes we've talked about how my favorites are Flash, Spider-Man, and Batman for their rogues galleries, but I never frequently think of the X-Men rogues gallery, but it's actually really quite good. But I think the part of that is that I don't think of them as rogues. I think of them as real villains, and some of them are more three-dimensional than others. But we've talked about our favorite X-Men. Let me put the question starting with you, Arco, and then going to everybody else. Who's your favorite X-Men villain?
My favorite number one villain is going to be a tie between Mr. Sinister and Apocalypse. I love, I love, and I cannot stress enough, Mr. Sinister. I love when he first showed up. I love his backstory that he wanted to kill every genetic variant of mutant that he felt was unworthy of being alive because it was messing up the gene pool. And I love the fact that he is attached at the hip with Apocalypse, who, when he first showed up in X Factor number 5, was, not much of a threat that he is, not much of a celestial threat that he is now, or has been in the last 20 years. But those two have a great storyline and were able to affect both in the 80s, directly and indirectly, 20 years worth of comics. And I think that by doing that, you really you show that you are a greatly written character, and they did fantastic with those two.
Great choice. What about you, Joe?
Excellent. Well, Magneto, of course, because he sets the stage for the whole series, actually. But and I also the way that Magneto interacts with the rest of the Marvel universe. I just finished reading, I don't know if Arco knows, I've mentioned this in other podcasts, but I caught my march through Marvel, and I'm up to 1971 now. With the Epic editions in my collection, I'm able to read whatever came out that month. And I just got past the Fantastic Four two-parter when the unholy alliance between Magneto and Submariner against the Fantastic Four, and it's just great issues. But there's one villain I like, and she has a great look to her, and she had a great moment in X2, X-Men United, and that's Lady Deathstrike. I just think she's a great villain, and I just love her. Just love the way she was designed, and I love that battle with Wolverine in the movie. So,
great origin story too, Joe. If you know it from the comics. For those who don't know, Lady Deathstrike, whose name will Yuriko, I think, is her first name, but I'm not
That's
sure.
correct. It's Yuriko.
Okay.
Lisa, yeah.
And she is the daughter of the man who created adamantium, and she feels was stolen from him and used on Wolverine. So she has a grudge match. She has a grudge, basically a lifelong grudge against him forever. So she had herself changed, cybernetic implants and adamantium claws on her by the other villainous Spiral, who did that to her. And ever since then, she's been basically hounding Wolverine.
Cool.
Yeah. No, she's a great character.
Good choices. What about you, James?
I love Apocalypse. Obviously, I love Magneto, but I like Sabretooth too. I mean, he's not necessarily he's
sure.
How to forget him? You're right.
I was wondering if somebody was going to pick Sabretooth. Yeah.
Sabretooth is great, and I also, Sentinels are great too. I think they're a great aspect of the whole.
Absolutely.
Like, humanity hates mutants, and we've created technology to destroy them. Sentinels have a great look, and it's funny, Chris. I had the same way, like, thinking about a rogues gallery. Like, sometimes I don't always think about. I guess because everyone's mutants, they're just like evil mutants and not rogues. I don't know. It is sort of an interesting thought process where I think about the X-Men villains and I'm like, well, some of these guys have been good guys at some point. Hasn't Magneto been part of the X-Men team outside of like?
Sure.
He led them in issue 200 of the original Uncanny X-Men. Charles Xavier, who was on trial, the trial of Magneto, basically, in The Hague, in Europe. Charles Xavier has a heart attack and is taken into space by his lover, Lilandra, from the Shi'ar Empire, and leaves Magneto in charge of his school, basically running the X-Men and the New Mutants more, because the X-Men were, adults by that point, so they didn't need, supervision. But he was in charge of the New Mutants for a while.
Well, and frankly, he's also one of the most sympathetic villains in all of comic books, right? The
Absolutely.
same things that we describe about the good qualities the qualities that make Killmonger such a good character in the Black Panther movie. It's the same thing with Eric, right? Because he's not wrong. Like some of the things that you'd go, okay, this is too far. But how he became Magneto, his surviving the Holocaust when his family didn't, all of that persecution that he already went through for being Jewish, and now you tack on that he's a mutant. How can you not sympathize with a character like that, and that maybe he does take it too far, and there's a lot about the character's history that I don't know as to whether or not things are unforgivable, whether or not he's redeemable, but it makes a lot of sense that he has continued to stick around as such as an intriguing and compelling character.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
He's a many layered villain, right? And then, you can understand his motivations. You don't have to condone the things he does, but like you said, Chris, same thing with Killmonger. Yeah, it's and that's another thing about the X-Men. Sometimes it's hard to tell the villain and the hero apart throughout the history of the X-Men, and it makes it even more intriguing to read and to become part of that world. So yeah, that's a great.
Good choices, James.
Oh, thank you. And Arco, I guess going back to your first episode when we talked about this, but the X-Men, now you just brought it up, kind of tie your two favorites. So you get the cosmic stuff in X-Men also with the Tal Shiar and the Starjammers, and
it's funny you say that, because one of my least favorite artists of Dave Cockrum came back after John Byrne left. John Byrne had a great run from issue like 108 to 140. I know, actually, he did like 144. He did Days of Future Past. He finished, I think, on that one. And Dave Cockrum came back, and his run brought us Starjammers, brought us the Brood, and one of my favorite one issue X-Men stories was Kitty's Fairy Tale. If you have a chance to look it up, you'll love it. However, while I do like the space aspect of it, it's always far down the line, because Cochrum's art to me is so flat that it makes it unenjoyable for me.
yeah. I mean, that's definitely fair. There's plenty of, I've talked about many artists, especially during that later run of Ultimate X-Men, that were the art of, I think, Chris Bellaccio. No disrespect, but it was not fitting for that book. I completely understand.
Agree.
I completely understand when the artist kind of ruins the story or doesn't elevate the story like it should be. But here's a controversial question. Might as well ask you. Mm-hmm. And this is a book I do remember you collected for the store. X-Men Origins Wolverine. Was that a good introduction or not a good introduction to the character? Like, is that something that you wanted to see, Wolverine's origin, or should we have never seen those books ever?
So that's the 4-issue limited series that came out. That's Andy Kubert, right? Okay.
Yeah, the Andy Kubert. Yeah.
So James, one thing that I remember very well, when that second issue came out and I went to buy it, you were standing behind the desk of the counter at Mint, and you probably don't remember this, but I said, "Did you read it?" And you go, "There are no words." And it was so cool that to hear you say that. It made me really look forward to reading it. It was time to give him an origin and get a name. It was time. It really worked good. The only thing that this is what I don't like when it comes to TV series or movies or looking back on it, comics, is that these creators, these writers are trying to be too clever. There was no reason for the antagonist in that series, Dog, whatever his name was, to not be Sabretooth. Okay, they drew him like Sabretooth. They gave him powers like Sabretooth. but it wasn't Sabretooth. Okay, there was no reason to do that. Okay, there didn't need to be somebody else out there with the powers that with the same style and same look as Wolverine and Sabretooth, and not have it be Sabretooth. So that was the one thing that I did not like from that. Otherwise, I'm perfectly okay with that origin story.
No, I am too. I just know some, debate the debates about X-Men fans and comic fans is like, yeah, he should never have an origin. I was just curious what your thoughts were. I enjoyed the whole series.
Yeah, I did too.
The art was incredible.
Mhm.
Joe, I mean, I know you read that series too. What were your thoughts on it?
I mostly echo Arco's, but there is a part of me, and I still hold on to this, that sometimes I don't want to know everything about a character, especially if they're an iconic, mysterious character like Wolverine, or in the DC universe like the Phantom Stranger. I can I can do without their origins. I don't need them, but I will say that, I'm sorry, I don't remember who wrote the that storyline. Arco, who was that? Who was the author of that?
Fantastic question. I have it here right in front of me,
Yeah.
but I can't see that far across, so I don't know who. I don't know
Okay,
who
I'm
wrote it.
sorry.
To be quite honest with you,
Well,
let's see.
again, it's a good story. I did not dislike it, but Chris and I have spoken about this in other podcasts about certain things vis-a-vis popular culture and science fiction and comics. Sometimes you don't need things, you don't need to know that. And so for me, I really didn't need to know beyond that he was, called Logan / Wolverine. But it's okay. I don't have a major problem with it. But there are characters I do not want to know about their backgrounds. I think they should stay shrouded in mystery. I think it just adds to
Bill Jamis.
Bill Jones.
Bill
Okay,
Jamis,
yes.
yep.
I would have never in a million
Me
years
neither. Sorry.
remember that or guess that. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
And Chris, have you read that story?
No, I can't say I have. Again, there was so much X-Men that I missed, and I grew up watching the cartoon. I grew up watching the 90s cartoon, and really enjoying it, but for whatever reason, that didn't really translate into a love of the comics. But also by the time I got into comics like heavily, it was around the time that like Ultimate X-Men came out, and I was running into sort of the same problem you were, James, with the art, that I couldn't tell who these characters were. A bunch of them looked exactly the same. I was grateful when you had like a woman on there, because I was like, I know who that is. But if you took Cyclops out of uniform, I was like, I that could be any number of X-Men.
Well, he always had his ruby quartz glasses. That's how you always told who Cyclops was.
But sometimes they would do like the stylized, like where they put the characters at a bit of a distance. And I'm like, I think that's Cyclops. Does it matter? I don't know. Like, and again, this is not like to say don't read Ultimate X-Men or anything like that. It was just my personal experience with it. So I only started really trying to read more. Honestly, I started reading more X-Men in preparation for this episode. Because I just realized it's a giant gaping hole in my knowledge base, that most of my X-Men knowledge came from either the movies, the cartoon, or X-Men Legends, the video game.
All very good places, by the way. But if I can, if you're going to stick with one piece of media and learn about the X-Men, the animated TV show from 92 to 96 or 97 is a great place, because they were very, very faithful to the series, the storylines,
That's what I would learn later. They did an incredible job of really translating it, and it was interesting for me watching X-Men, and why I sort of had to race home and watch it every day was because they really did. They leaned into the serialization of it. You couldn't you couldn't come into it later on and see Mimic and know what the hell was going on if you were new to it, right? So it was and they really did. They got everything in there. Even I still remember that at the time I couldn't really understand why Storm was freaking out in the box on Genosha, but they did. They brought they brought her claustrophobia into the series.
Right.
And I thought stuff like that, looking back, especially, I was like, oh, I liked it when I was younger, but as I get older, it's even cooler looking back and seeing how hard they worked to really be true to the characters, the stories, as well as the spirit of X-Men. So.
Yeah, and I will say, Chris, we'll do our hoopla plug because
oh yeah, I suppose we hadn't done that yet, had we?
all 5 storylines that Arco mentioned are all available on Hoopla. Mutant Massacre is there, Fall of the Mutants, Inferno, Executioner's Song, and what was the last? Oh, Fatal Attractions.
Fatal Attractions,
Okay. Yeah,
and Fatal Attractions, I only recognize. It's funny because I tried to play the Marvel Overpower card game before I was playing like Pokemon, and nobody else played that game, but I was collecting everything, and so Fatal Attraction was one of like the sort of scenarios you could play in the card game. Right. So I'm like, I recognize that, and I kind of know what it's about.
A lot of people don't realize how much happened in Fatal Attractions. It wasn't as huge of a storyline. It didn't encompass the whole Marvel universe. But a lot happened. Not only did Wolverine lose his adamantium to Magneto, but Professor X and the same issue basically mind wiped Magneto, made him a vegetable, which then led to Onslaught 3 years later. And also Magic Ileana Rasputin died from the legacy virus. Was one of the biggest mutants to die. She was only a child at the time. She regressed back to her child years, and that sent Colossus on his way to leaving the X-Men and joining X-Men Magneto's group, which were stationed on Asteroid M. Also was the first appearance of Exodus, which is a great character, and Magneto's acolytes, which were great characters in the early to mid 90s before they fell off the map entirely.
Wow, that is a lot, because for me, obviously I haven't read it yet, so I'm looking forward to getting to it, because I only just recently wrapped up and it's the silly things too, right? Like I only just recently wrapped up the Fate of the Phoenix, and didn't realize that, like, oh, right on the tail of that is comes Days of Future Past. So things like that being put into perspective, I really appreciate it. But for me, one of the most, I thought, one of the coolest pieces of art was just Wolverine having the adamantium ripped out of him as he's screaming. Like, it was for whatever reason, and I can't tell you what it was exactly, because again, I didn't have a huge attachment to the books or the characters, but just the way it was drawn, it's so iconic that it still sticks in my brain. That one very big panel of Magneto just hovering over him, ripping the adamantium that comes out of him like liquid. It's just crazy.
I agree.
Which I hear from, like, I listened to a podcast with some writers. I don't know if this is true because I didn't hear it from his mouth, but from secondhand from another writer in the X-Men writing room at the time, apparently that was a throwaway storyline that Peter David said, like, well, I would just rip the adamantium out of Wolverine. That's what I would do.
Well, because it's a question that comes up a lot, right? Like, it's a question that comes up a lot when we're talking about superheroes and superpowers is, well, why wouldn't you just do that? And the answer usually is something along the lines of, well, because that kills any hope for a narrative. Like, this is what we ran into with DC, right? Is that you have these characters that are so powerful that you're like, well, realistically, they could or would just do this. We can't backtrack on their powers, so now what? So it's a really good question of, like, why? Yeah, I would just rip all the metal off of his skeleton.
But
yeah, no, that's a good point, Chris. Like, why wouldn't Batman years ago put acid on the Joker's brakes?
Yeah,
the Joker has killed. He's probably killed half the population of Gotham City. Yeah. And it's like, how the hell is the Joker still alive?
Well, that's the story that gets explored in Injustice, right? When it's finally like, and we run into it with his son too, Damien, of like, how many people are going to die? How many people will you let die before you finally pull the trigger on him? And so there are stories that come out of that. So it is funny that it's a throwaway story, but how many times do we look at something like that as a throwaway, but it actually asks a question or poses a situation that we've all talked about in comic book stores, having that conversation in Mint. And it's like, oh, finally somebody decided to address this story or this idea, and let's see how it plays out.
And I appreciate. Oh, sorry, Arco.
No, I'm
Didn't
sorry.
mean
It took 7 years for them
Yeah.
and that's the best part. I don't know if you were going to say that, James, but it took a long time for them to actually give it back. So they just didn't say, just give it back to him, within the next few issues. He went 7 years without it, and for better or worse, I don't know if you thought the character was better with or without it, but it was it was good that they didn't just give it back to him.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a consequence, and that's the thing that can be really interesting to explore. It's something that I think from a storytelling standpoint, sometimes we're a little too quick to write the story and let it, instead of letting some of the story write itself. It's something that I really admire about Farscape. For the first couple of seasons there, they weren't exactly sure where they were going with the show. And the way they had gotten Crichton out into the deepest, darkest reaches of space was through a wormhole, but that wasn't supposed to be integral to the plot. It wasn't until it kept sort of coming up almost of its own accord that they decided to make it the centerpiece of the series going into season 3. And that's where their strongest work was season 3, season 4. So whether you think that's where some of the strongest writing came from or not, at least they gave that story the opportunity to unfold, and they gave Logan an opportunity to develop as a character without that adamantium. So at least we saw, okay, there are going to be consequences. This is going to last a while. So let's adjust to the new normal. I think that's cool.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So as we bring like this episode to a close, we might as well get to the how come you stopped reading X-Men, Arco?
Yes,
that is a good question, because if there is one, that I really could have kept going on with after I stopped everything else, it would have been X-Men. However, the stories sucked, and I'm sorry. I'm not shitting on. To me, the story sucked. I have a wealth of information that tells me that that the best writers were from the 80s and 70s, 80s, and 90s. Claremont, Lee, Alan Davis, Scott Lobdell, up until 95, they were great. And even though I know that Claremont did, other stuff in the 2010s before they finally got rid of him and everything, it wasn't the same. The fact that the continuity, a very important word in comic books, had totally gone through it had totally been thrown out the window. It didn't mean anything anymore. From when I started in 1985 to when I officially stopped in the 90s collecting, and then I got back into it 2000, 10 years. You could connect everything from 85 to 95 in the X-Men books. Even though they have some more books, you had X Factor, you had X Force, you had New Mutants, and all that stuff. They were all working. Whatever was happening in one book, the main books, affected the other ones. That's continuity to me. When they got rid of that, it was over. And you can blame, in my opinion, one person for that. And my Wolverine smokes, my Wolverine drinks. And I'm sorry that Joe Quesada felt that he was too sensitive and the world was too sensitive that they couldn't see that anymore. Okay. However, I don't remember too many kids picking up a cigarette or a cigar in 1985 because Wolverine was doing it, or doing all kinds of stupid things because the mutants were doing it. We won't get into that in that politicalized discussion of things like that. However, I blame a lot of the problems that came in the 2000s and beyond on Joe Quesada himself. So I don't know how you feel about that or where you land on that particular discussion, but I blame that.
Well, Arco, I gave up on the X-Men after the last story I wrote was AVX, the Avengers versus the X-Men, and that was about 10 years ago. And I gave up for various reasons. One, there was too many books, too many characters. And then, of course, the whole MCU, when it became popular, and since the X-Men were owned, they're not outwardly owned by Marvel, Marvel just dropped the X-Men books for a while. Then they brought them back again, and they exploded again onto the scene. It was just way too much to try to keep up with. So, recently, I know James had recently recommended, and rightfully so, the 2 volumes that Hickman wrote recently. James, what were they titled again?
Yeah, Arco, I recommend this. House of X and Powers of X, which I'd recommend giving a look. I mean, Joe, I don't know if you had a chance to look at it. I mean, go ahead, Joe. I'll let you make your point.
No, what I was going to say is that unfortunately he was dismissed. Mr. Hickman, and he's taken his toys and gone over to
Mhm.
Substack. But and the people in the X-Men office now don't know what the hell they're doing. So, Arco, you're not missing anything
I don't
right
think I
now,
am.
unfortunately.
Thank you.
No. But you're right. Casada made some bad choices, as did Dan Didio over at DC. I think both of these guys got too big for their heads got too big for their
Let me put it
egos.
this way: I had no idea who the editor in chiefs were back in the 1980s or 90s. Okay, I
Right.
mean, I did, but you only knew them on paper. You never heard them or
Hmm.
saw them. And even in 2000, with the internet, with the soapbox that the internet was, I still should never have heard from Joe Quesada. I should never have heard
Right.
in the comic book stores or from Wizard what was going on with him. He was the superstar in his mind. Okay, and I don't know who gave him the power to do it, but he took it upon himself to change everything, and some of it was okay. I will admit that Ultimate Spider-Man and Ultimate X-Men, when they first came out, were great, but I guarantee you by 3 years later, everybody was tired of it because it was the same story over and over and over again.
Yeah. It's a sports analogy I would make, Arco, is like when the owner of the team becomes, garners more
Yeah,
press on the back page of the ball plays,
Alistair,
like old man
yeah, yeah,
Steinbrenner,
Alistair Brenner.
like Woody
Hmm.
Johnson, like
Yeah,
Hess, like the Maras. We can go on and on, but yeah, I echo those sentiments, Arco. Yes.
Yeah, it's a shame. I know. Yeah, I will say it's a shame. The X Men books fall apart. But like I was just saying, Arco, I would give House of X and Powers of X a
okay.
try, um, because
Hickman was good.
Hickman's good. He did obviously leave, as Joe said, but I think he left because they weren't going to pay him what he wanted.
Right.
And what
Yeah,
I've
exactly.
read or heard from other podcasts that like really break down the comic industry, when they realize they made a mistake, they'll hire him back and he'll pick up the X Men again because he
Yeah.
basically didn't finish his X Men story. And if they want him to, he's willing to come back if they pay his amount. So,
Mhm.
but I will say that the Hickman run was trying to found a way to restore X Men back to the continuity you remember. That's what I'll say
Okay.
was what he was trying to do with his run.
Okay.
So they were bringing back characters and restoring characters' personalities and costumes and everything back to that Claremont era when the X Men were in their golden age. So I think
Mhm.
for a person like you who has so much knowledge, I think you might enjoy
Okay.
what you see in those books. But
Thank you very much for the suggestion.
yeah. So this was great, Arco. Really
Yeah, this
enjoyed
has been
having this deep
fantastic.
dive with you. I think we could probably do it again on
Thank you. I
other.
appreciate that.
Yeah, we've got a couple of big X-Men stories that we could really pick apart. That could be fun.
Hey, as long as I know them, remember you know my time period. Anything after 1995, and you may be teaching me something. But the X-Men, they are about to me. They're about change. They're about being different. Stan Lee, looking back on it, created a allegory for the civil rights. He said it as
Hmm.
much. It's been dissected. The X-Men has not been afraid of bringing about LGBTQ rights, characters like that. North Star, first openly gay character as a mutant.
That's correct,
Okay,
right? Right.
diversity. How many different people and races within the team by themselves? We talked about the religion. They're not afraid to. God loves, man kills. Great graphic
Oh God,
novel.
yeah,
Claremont.
I love it.
Stryker was not a. For those of us who know Stryker as a general, he wasn't. He was a preacher and was one of
Hmm.
the X-Men's greatest foes at the time.
Yes.
And anti-Semitism. You guys brought it up before. Magneto, although he did not appear as a sympathetic character, they gave him more layers. When the X Men came back in the 70s, and they made him that Eric Lenscher character, a person who was
Hmm.
survived the concentration camps. So you have all these great parts to the X-Men. I don't see how anybody could really go wrong following up the X-Men, classic X-Men. So definitely pick it up if you're out there, folks. If you need a new comic book, that's the people to go to.
Excellent, excellent. Well, that was a
There you
great way
go.
to tie up the episode. Before we wrap things up, Arco, will you please plug your podcast again?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. So me and my friend Jason Allison, we have a podcast called Movie Challenge Accepted. I know that the three gentlemen here have been listening to us, and we really appreciate that. Basically, the premise is we challenge each other to watch films that we normally wouldn't watch unless there's a gun to our heads. Jason is a highfalutin movie aficionado. He loves black and white. He loves subtitles. He doesn't care if it's 4 hours of Russian art film. Oh God, don't want to turn him on to that because he'll make me watch it. And up until recently, he didn't watch any MCU films. And you know me, I'm all about action, adventure, and give me Vin Diesel and his gravelly voice in a car that goes into space any day. So it's been great, and we've had a good turnout. And if you guys want something to listen to that maybe you'll agree with us, maybe you'll disagree, but I think you'll have fun listening to us. Movie Challenge Accepted.
Excellent. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Thank you.
And Movie Challenge Accepted is also on Instagram as well, and Facebook, right?
Yes, absolutely. Facebook group, Movie Challenge Accepted. Same thing with Instagram.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Arco, so much for being on this episode and giving us all your X-Men knowledge and wisdom.
Yeah,
I think
so
you
great
lived
to
up
share
to
this
the expert
conversation with you, Arco.
title.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate
This has
that.
been fantastic, Arco.
You guys,
Thank you.
You guys are great. You're doing a great job. I listen to you guys every week, and it doesn't have to be about mutants or Marvel or anything. I just love the fact that you guys have got the pulse of what people like you and me really do like out in this world. So thank you very much for doing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. And
You're quite welcome.
as we wrap this up, thank you once again, Joe, for always being here.
Oh, this has been a pleasure. This has been my great pleasure to be with Arco today on the podcast.
Excellent.
Thank you.
And Chris, thank you as always for being here.
This was great. I had a blast.
Excellent. And thank you, audience, for being here. As always, if you want to join in our conversation or make comments, you can find us at Secret Origins of Mint Condition on Facebook, secretoriginsmc@gmail.com. You can email us with any questions, comments, or anything maybe you'd like to see on the show. And Secret Origins MC is our Instagram account as well. Again, if you have time, we'd really appreciate you liking, sharing, and writing a review for this podcast. That would really help us get out to other people in the community. And we thank you for listening, and we will talk to you soon.